Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. What a week it's been. I've been crazy busy with the new job, so I got back home late yesterday afternoon and sort of trying to reset and have time to actually still do the podcast as often as I can. Today is a very old friend of mine, Camper English. We were just talking about, we're going to revisit this, but we were talking about off screen how the pandemic and institutionalized knowledge has sort of reset post-pandemic with a lot of young bartenders coming in the industry in the 2020s, 2021, 2022, which is crazy when you're going on 25 years in the industry and you're talking about bartenders. One of my bartenders recently, just on Friday, I'm going to call you out, Nick Hugh, because I know you listen to this and you watch this regularly, said, when I asked him how old did he think I was? He said 53, which is about 8 to 9 years older than I am. So I will take that as a compliment because of my knowledge base, not because of the way I look, because this industry is very hard on you. But Camper English is a multi-award winning author, writer, journalist. If you have, and I'm going to go off topic on this one, if you ever read any of his work when he went to High Cognac, it is one of the most prolific pieces of cognac knowledge that's been dropped on the internet. In recent years, I use it as a reference point for a lot of the work I do, because a lot of cognac houses keep their secrets close to their chest, and he got a lot of great knowledge out of Hine when he was there in Cognac a number of years ago. Welcome, Camper English.
Well, hello.
So let's kick it off. How'd you get into writing about drinks and spirits and ice eventually? What started all this?
I guess it's been a minute now. I was laid off. I was a software engineer a long time ago, and I started doing reviews of bars and clubs back before Yelp, when people got paid to give their opinion of bars and clubs, and doing them for like $25 a piece and $30 a month or something for a while. So I eventually found that I was making all of my money writing. I was like, okay, I guess I'm a writer now. And I was just club trash getting paid for it initially. But then I saw, as we got towards 2008 or so, that the cocktail renaissance was going to happen. It was happening. There was a critical mass of bars doing interesting things. And at the time, I was a complete amateur and just learning from bartenders what they were doing and then kind of reporting on that. And so that's how I got into it. I was interested and then made a career out of it.
How do you keep your curiosity going? Because when you tend to get a topic in your head, you tend to go as deep as possible, like straight down deep. How do you keep that curiosity, and how do you sort of push yourself to go down the rabbit hole?
It's easier for me to go deep than it is for me to do it at a surface level. And I think part of that is just the nature of how I work. I like doing research, and you report a little bit of everything that you learned about a certain topic, but it's just after a certain point, it's just an absolute waste of money to keep going deeper and deeper on something. But I've got a blog, so that's where a lot of stuff goes, that I can go as deep as humanly possible, and I'll still have a place to put it, even though it makes me no money at all. And I think people with actual, jobs and bosses don't have the luxury to go as deep as I can independently.
Yeah, because as I mentioned in the previews for the cognac thing, like when you did that Hine piece and that cognac piece, even if you go Google now, you're one of the only people to ever really get into wet cellar, dry cellar sort of stuff, and it is the most unusual one of the most unusual aspects that cognac has, is that wet dry cellar. And so it's always nice to see, instead of it just being like a surface level article about like, oh, they cellar their cognac, their eau de vie for X amount of years, you really deep and dive on that one.
Yeah, well, cognac in particular is so much more complicated
Hmm.
and interesting to make than they ever mention. And when you actually get to go there and visit, you pick up a few more things. You're like, wait a minute, like this is so much cooler. Like for American whiskey, you stick it in the warehouse and
Yeah.
you dump it out at the end. Cognac is dynamic. You're always mixing blends for certain years, and if it's going to be a VSOP, you might water it down a little bit at certain stages along the way, and wet cellar, dry cellar, aging environments, and which barrels, how new they are, how many times they've been used before. That's all in the works. Like no wonder it's so expensive
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's a lot more complicated than they talk about. It's all luxury and marketing, but actually the reason to get really into cognac for me is because it's so interesting how it's made, and it's a lot different than everything else we talk about.
As we were talking about in the green screen about institutionalized knowledge, your website Cocktail Safe, you launched Cocktail Safe probably close to am I right saying close to a decade ago?
Something like that, yeah.
I feel like it was 2015, 2016 that it came out. And so explain to everybody who's listening, because again, we're talking about institution. I'm just going to screw that up. Knowledge. Talk about what sort of brought that about, because it is an important reference point. Because as I was saying, I was talking to my bar team the other day at one of my places, and they're talking about baby breath and charcoal. I'm like, no, what are you talking about? This should be something that is in the back of your brain already, or well, it's in the back of my brain. Like, what's not good, what's bad, tobacco, too much quinine, all these sort of things are in the back of my brain already. What sort of brought about the Cocktail Safe website?
It was really specifically a couple of issues, and it was tobacco and activated charcoal. People were making tobacco bitters before even really a lot of the smoked cocktail stuff that's
Hmm.
happening now, but actually infusing tobacco into alcohol, which is crazy, crazy poisonous, and should never be done. And everything that's tobacco bitters that's on the market should be just tobacco flavored and not
Hmm.
from actual tobacco. But that's one of the points of confusion because you see tobacco bitters, you're like, oh, I can make those at home. No, you can't. You shouldn't. You really shouldn't. And then activated charcoal to turn cocktails nice and cool looking and black. But there are consequences that it can disable any medications in your system at the same time as that activated charcoal. So those were the two big issues that drove the creation of the website, because there was no centralized place where um, that knowledge could be stored. Like people were chatting about it on Facebook and whatnot, but I realized there was a need for a place where a reference site that people could go to. So I applied and received a grant from Tales of the Cocktail Foundation, and that allowed me to take the time to build it out and add not just a few ingredients, but I don't know how many there are on there, like probably 35, and then flowers gets a list of 100 of poisonous flowers that you shouldn't be putting in your cocktails. So yeah, that's been up there, and it does need a refresh in that people don't go to websites anymore. They go
Hmm.
to social media websites, and then that might lead them off to another website. So it definitely could use basically to memify the whole website, make videos and Instagram posts of every single thing on it, just to bring the attention back to it, because that's where the people are these
Hmm.
days. So I'm hoping to maybe get a new grant or some sponsorship somewhere for so I can afford the time to do all that.
What was the weirdest ingredient when you were um when you were researching that you were like, everybody uses this and everybody's going crazy with this? I always find it's one of those things, as you said, like it's this one ingredient, like say tonic water, and then someone's like, oh, I want it extra bitter, so they'd use a bunch of quinine, and that's not always great. Was there an ingredient that when you were building the website out that you were like, oh crap, everybody uses that, this is not going to be good?
Um, Not so much, other than like the very beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of flowers going into drinks
Hmm.
that were just picked from the florist, which is going to be full of maybe even artificial colors, but insecticides and things like that, or stuff picked from nature, which people would assume that it's safe because it comes from nature. And what I always say is, all poison ivy is organic.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't mean that it's safe to consume. So I think there's a lot of a mindset behind safety for cocktail ingredients because we
Mhm.
all just want to like try stuff. That's part of the fun with making drinks and bartending is try something that's never been tried. But often there's a reason that you don't see things in drinks because it might not be safe. I would be a lot more cautious about liquid nitrogen than a lot of people seem to be because it when you get good at it and are trained properly, people are very. It looks easy, like people
Mm.
aren't working hard at safety, but because they've learned that already, they're doing fine. Whereas, if I went, certainly I would like freeze off a couple fingers if I opened up one of those canisters myself. Like I know my limits, and they're
Yeah.
they're real low.
I always find like again, you were talking about Instagram. That's where most people go for things. People see a recipe and go, "Oh, let's do cedar flavored something." And I'm like, "Well, which cedar variety are you using?" Because one cedar will make you very, very, very ill and send you to hospital.
Mm.
And it's always like that. So, and again, and I think it's this day and age where it's, "Oh, I saw it here. I'm going to try and replicate it without knowing." As you said about the tobacco bitters, was the perfect example.
Yeah, and a thing that I hadn't thought about when I first started building this site was that influence of if it's on the menu and it says tobacco bitters, that's the bar might be acting safely by having just
Hmm.
tobacco flavored bitters, but it is subconsciously influencing people to go home and try
Hmm.
something unsafe. And so there's kind of two different areas of danger there, like whether the ingredient itself is dangerous or whether it inspires people to act irresponsibly. Kind of not the bar's fault, but we could do better. Like
Yeah. Oh, and
they
in this day
know
and age, it's influencers as well. Influencers on TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that.
for sure. I mean, that's where we get all the to this day all the activated charcoal and stuff. I saw a whole bunch this Halloween. It had been quite a while since I'd seen so much activated charcoal in play. But yeah, as we were discussing earlier, like the just the loss of knowledge between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. There's people weren't even calling them out on it, which is a good thing about a lot of the stuff that I've done is that through word of mouth, and particularly with bartenders more so than influencers, they someone will comment on it like, "Hey,
Mm,
actually, that's not safe," and then they'll eventually get back to Cocktail Safe or somewhere else that instructs it. But people tend to be very defensive when
mm.
they do something and it turns out that might not be okay rather than be like, oh, okay, I'm going to take this post down right now. People go, actually, why is it or
Yeah.
whatever. And I'm the same. Like when I get called out on screwing something up, I tend to defend it first and then I have to reset like, actually, get your ego out of this.
Well, let's talk about that institutionalized knowledge. How, as older, I'm going to say older bar leaders, can we get the younger generation? Because we did see a massive shift post pandemic of bartenders going from, we should have had like a nice meaty section of like people my age, like in the industry for a long time, the late 20s, early 30s, sort of age bracket, and then the youngsters, and then that middle section sort of like dropped out after the pandemic, and that flow of knowledge basically like did stop. And I talked to some
Yeah.
kids and talked to them like, "Oh, do you know Camper English? Do you know Dale DeGroff? Do you know David Wondrich?" And they're like, "Who?" And I'm like, "This is in my world basic stuff you should learn. You should know."
Yeah, it's interesting how everything fell out of the
Yeah.
middle because I think there are two problems. One is that, as we said, the middle tier has fallen out of the industry, and that were the working bartenders who had been working for a while, but understandably, particularly in the U.S. where a bar job doesn't guarantee you health care or anything like that, there were in the middle of a pandemic, like a lot of people realized like it's not treating them
Hmm.
well, so they left. And so now what we have at a lot of bars is one person with a lot of knowledge who's running the bar and trying to, you know, develop all the drinks and keep the menu running and doing all the budgeting and stuff. And then younger bartenders who are just serving, and there's a lot of more batching than there used to be because there needs to be,
Hmm.
and no one has the time to train. And because bartending has had all of these sort of independent opportunities to learn the skill, and a lot of the skills are in customer service, which doesn't require a whole ton of knowledge of the blending routine for cognac and stuff like that. That there's not like everyone who is a bartender at a top level has gone through some
Mm.
specific set of steps. Now, for a while, it was just because of the time as we were rediscovering the lost cocktails and relearning the classics, and the books started only coming out in our time of explaining the old
Yeah.
cocktails. And now there are so many books that bartenders have no idea where to start, like
Hmm.
a clear path from, I mean, get from the beginning to get to as nerdy as they want to be, because I think the so much information, and it's also distributed really unevenly. So now we have influencers on Instagram and everything like that, doing what some of the brands used to do in the past, or those famous bartenders of old doing in the past in classes and events like Tales of the Cocktail and
Hmm.
things like that. So it's a scattershot bunch of information, and there's not like a set of information that everyone agrees to or has this sort of almost standards of information. So a lot of stuff gets slips through the cracks.
Mm.
Cocktail Safe and all of that is a big one that has slipped through because there's no brand behind it. It's me.
Yeah. And the website for that's cocktailsafe.org.
Yes, but I
Cocktailsafe.org. So
think I
if you,
think I have the other ones registered as well, so you'll get there eventually. But cocktailsafe.org is
so
down.
please, for the love of God, before you put activated charcoal or baby's breath in a cocktail, please go and check that out, and tobacco bitters and whatnot. Um, what got you into, because you basically like pioneered directional freezing's been around forever, but like you pioneered how to turn directional freezing into something that can actually be used, because that's always the hard thing, is that it's that one big step. How did that sort of directional freezing play come out?
Well, I it was early on in the new era of big ice, where bars
Mm.
like Milk and Honey were using large ice in cocktails like the old fashioned, which it's hard to think that there was a time when that was a cocktail that needed to come back, because now you're just like, could we please move on from that one basic drink? But when you had an old fashioned 15 years ago, it'd be often on like a lot of wet ice with the muddled cherry and orange
Mm.
slice in it and all of that. And part of what elevated that drink and some others was using big ice. And so bars were cutting it up themselves, and a lot of bartenders were interested in clarity in ice that they were making themselves. So I was hearing what they were talking about and sort of some of the theories of making clear ice. How do we get it more clear? And I just decided to test the theories. I did not expect to come up with a solution. I just was kind of sick of hearing about some stuff that I knew was wrong, and so I just wanted to like show, okay, that doesn't work. But then figured out this basically it's just a hack of the directional freezing to make clear ice, and so now that spread pretty far. But yeah, I just did a series of experiments. Like you were talking about going deep on subjects before. If I was a journalist who just reports on things, then none of this would have happened,
Mhm.
or someone else would have figured it out before before I did. So yeah, so it was a lot of trial and error. I tried to read a lot of books about it, and I more learned after I figured out directional freezing,
Mhm.
why directional freezing works, rather than, but I figured it out through mostly trial and error. Like, hey, if we change the shape, the container that we're freezing this water in, the cloudy parts are in different spots.
Yeah.
What's up with that? And that was really the basic piece of information that allowed me to put it together, because no treatment of the water did anything, distilled
Oh,
or boiled
boiled.
or carbonated or whatever. I tried everything.
Blessed by a priest. Like,
I melted, refroze it,
yeah.
melted it again, refroze it like 12 times. Didn't get any clearer.
I always find it interesting because ice has always been a big part of my programs and everything. Like 2013, when I did Little Jumbo, um, we had like 6, 7 different styles of ice. We weren't quite at the clarity section, but fast forward to 2017, I had 14 different styles of ice at FTW when I opened. So like different clear ices, we brought in 300-pound blocks of ice, chainsawed them up, cut them down. And ice has always been a big thing for me. At the very start of my career, one of my operators said, ice is a 3-letter word for profit, because it is just frozen water. Because people think it's hard to geek out. Like you're geeking out about frozen water. And you're like, yeah, but that's a very important part of being in the bar industry, is that frozen water and how it looks. And so, yeah, even now I'm still geeking out hard about ice at all times.
Yeah, same. I actually had an article go up today on vinepair.com about someone in Norway is harvesting lake ice again,
Mm,
and has it tested to verify that it is food safe. There's no bacteria in that
yeah.
or anything like that. And so, yeah, I'm always thinking about it. Occasionally flying to Norway to go look at it. And
Did you fly to Norway and go look at it?
yeah, a former bartender in San Francisco is a co-owner of a bar in Oslo now, and he knew about this ice farm where they get their ice from, and they have like a bartender appreciation party. So they arranged to get me out there for that event, and met the guy with the ice farm, and eventually came out with this story about it.
Wow. So yeah, please go read that, because is it very similar to like the start of Frozen when they're all cutting up the ice in the middle of the night and putting it on sleds?
Well, they have chainsaws now, but it's they're not doing the manual sawing. But then it gets put in these gargantuan blocks that are 1 ton blocks of ice.
Oh
So,
wow.
so that's like 7 or 8 times the size of a
Yeah.
Klein Bell 300-pound block, and then they get loaded into the barn, which is a frozen storage facility. So it keeps all the ice for the year and previous years all stacked up in this big warehouse, like the end of that first Indiana Jones movie, where
Yeah.
the Holy Grail goes. But big, huge blocks of ice. And then if they need it for like to build an ice hotel or something like that, it could go there, or it could go for cocktails. And they have this giant robot that's with a 3D axis, so it can do giant sculptures with it. It's a pretty cool operation. But
Wow.
I think most importantly, it's clean and safe, which is an unknown, I guess. I don't
Mm,
know that that's necessarily the case in anywhere in North America, for example, if the water would test clean enough to use. That was part of the reason that the lake ice industry went away in the
yeah.
1800s, was like partly the end of the little ice age, so lakes were not as thick coated
Hmm.
with ice anymore, and partly just because of industrial pollution. All the smokestack stuff going into the air wound up in the ice, and some people were harvesting it from near cities and places like Chicago or Philadelphia or something, and that was just not safe to
No.
drink or to put in your drink if it was ice.
So that pushed you towards the right in the ice book. Again, as we just said, like we're geeking out about frozen water. Um, what was the purpose of the ice book?
The ice book, I mean, 15 years after I figured out the directional freezing thing, someone finally let me publish an ice book. And so it was really, the book is mostly to serve the consumers rather than bartenders, because I would have just put different information of scaling it up into the
Hmm.
book if it had been intended for industry exclusively. But yeah, it was time for an ice book, and I had a book proposal out there for more than a year. My agent had been pitching it to publishers. No one was interested at all. Like, that'll never sell. And then it's on the front page of the New York Times website when it came out. Thanks to Robert Simonson for writing about it, for recognizing that, like, yeah, it's kind of a big deal. Like, this is something that it's the sourdough of cocktails.
Mm,
That people's pandemic project was making ice cubes, and here's finally a written form of that information rather than just people on TikTok sharing it between person to person
yeah.
um, that way.
I think ice again, like I'm gonna harp about ice tons, but like I think ice again is one of those ones that it's a subconscious thing now in cocktail bars. When people go to bars, like they'll notice bad ice, but they won't notice good ice. So they
Yeah, I know I
notice
will.
the yeah, yeah, I know. I'm the same. Like I walk in, I'm like, come on, man, I'm paying 18, 19, $20 a cocktail and I'm on a fucking cloudy queen cube. Like, come on. You no,
Yep.
come on. But it is one of those things is like when I had Clives, like people would go like, oh, do people care? Because we cut down our ice because we don't have a Hoshizaki or a cold draft. We actually cut down inch by inch ice cubes from a full block. And so
Wow.
that would be like our display ice was a Negroni was on 3 inch by inch clear ice cubes. And people go, do you think people care? I'm like, I don't care, but I love walking around the room and seeing translucent cocktails on every single table that are on ice because you can't tell the ice cubes in there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, which you get used to, and then it's very subtle, particularly now with all of the
Mm-hmm.
milk punch clarification and
Oh yeah.
like cloudy bits in cocktails. That's gone away, which good and bad, but there's aspects to that. But you need the clarity of the ice is so much more important for those drinks. There would be no point in doing all of these clarified milk punch cocktails without clear ice in them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it
Mm-hmm.
absolutely would be. Can you imagine? It would look like a goober in the middle of your drink,
Yeah.
like to have milk punch served on a cloudy 2-inch thing made in the silicone trays in the
Yeah.
back.
You've done a lot of cocktail books. Obviously behind you is a ton of research, and you've done a ton of research on the history of cocktail culture. What do you think a cocktail trend that needs to come back? I know that every year, 2024 and 2025, I'm sure you're always asked like, what's the next trend? What trend do you think is still buried and needs to come back?
Hmm. Um, oh, I'm thinking more of like spirits and flavors, whatever. Right now, like talking about all this clarification stuff, like I hanker for lime juice
Mm,
these days rather than just like isolated acids used
mhm.
in batched cocktails. Like, I was thinking about this last night, just thinking about daiquiris as one does. And just like, well, I kind of miss juicy drinks
Mhm.
outside of tiki bar, pineapple, and tropical juices, which are everywhere. But just you'd go to bars and the drinks would be every different color, and they're all very juicy, like that. And I kind of miss that a little bit. So that's only coming back from 6 years ago
Yeah.
rather than
Just a
from
nice
ancient times.
sidecar, a nice white lady, just something like that. I don't want it to be Spinzalled lime juice and Spinzalled lemon juice. Just a classic, freshly squeezed a la minute daiquiri.
Yeah, and by someone who knows balance, which is the other thing that's missing, I guess. That's the younger bartenders without a lot of training are great at customer service, at least
Mhm.
being polite and nice and serving things, but not great with knowledge anymore, and are generally less trusted by the managers to do, like, oh, let me just make you a perfect margarita or
Mm.
daiquiri or something like that. So, and there's good reasons that takes some skill and experience, which is not impossible to do, but nobody has time to show
Yeah.
anybody how to do stuff anymore. So yeah, I'm like, bring back citrus
Yeah.
from
Yeah, bring
actual
back
real
citrus.
limes.
Yeah, no batched. I was in a bar recently and I was just picking up a shift and order for a La Paloma came up, and obviously we don't have grapefruit soda because that's never come up. And it's like, where's your juicer? And they're like, oh, we got this thing. And it was not a juicer. It was a juicer sort of, but it wasn't elbow juicer. And I was like, okay. She's like, will this work? I'm like, I will make this work right now to make this La Paloma, because everything is batched and pre-done and everything's pre-juiced and everything's like, it is crazy that I can still walk into bars and still be shocked and surprised at things.
Yeah, for sure. I think also, something that I miss, and I just thought of this now, is like drinks that are less subtle. I want those back again. It's just like a
Mm,
big wallop of the base spirit and the accent flavor, and it has like a very simple point to it. We have part of the thing that I don't like about batching is just that the flavors meld together so well that there's no
mm,
angles anymore. Like I want
mm,
a message from a drink. I want it to tell me what it's doing. And I think there's a movement, which is interesting, even if it's not to my taste, away from um, like a specific base spirit into the format is almost more important than the base spirit.
mm,
So, for example, the spritz section on a lot of cocktail menus is that's not really about a base spirit there. It's about the choice of sparkles and bitterness in the drinks. And then a lot of other drinks I'm seeing around particular when they are batched will be like it's like a little bit like a touch of Geneva on top of the Baijiu on top of the
mm,
gin that's in the drink. And when you read the menu description, like I don't know what anything is going to taste like. If it has
mm.
three different base spirits that are different in them, certainly one's going to be have more and another one's going to be the accent flavor. But as the menu description gets harder to read, and the drink is more subtle and nuanced and all of that, it's I think it's a stylistic change that's happening, and it's that's fine. It's cool, but sometimes I want obvious
Yeah.
obvious cocktails
Yeah, like if
again.
you want a bourbon drink, you want a bourbon drink. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, David Wonders' article recently yesterday is like, I don't recognize any of the ingredients. This is a very, very good. A lot of people like sort of sound like I understand the movement, but sometimes we have to, as industry people, we need to put our brains back and go, we are actually making these drinks for people to drink them as a consumer. And while it's cool to think that, because we get trapped in that little bubble of awesomeness sometimes, and it's like, oh, we can do all this and this, and it's cool. But with a customer who comes in at 10:30 on a busy Friday night, who doesn't really have time to ask questions, be like, oh, I know exactly what that drink is going to taste like.
Yeah, there's a lot of words that are on menus that nobody understands anymore, and I feel like I should know all of the words on a cocktail menu,
Mhm.
and I absolutely do not anymore. I'm just like, I don't know what that is, and I'm a longtime vegetarian, so I'm like, is that meat? Like,
Yeah.
that's like I don't care. Other than that, really, like I'll try new stuff, great, but I have to just make sure that most words that I don't know that are on menus are like meats.
Oh, that is weird. Um,
I just never learned like, oh, that's a fish. Have you not heard of that? Like, nope.
no, no, I have not known about this Norwegian fish that you've decided to put into this alcohol. Actually, the bar I'm running right now is a Baiju bar, and that has been a
Nice.
big learning curve. Like we have 50 Baijus or so, and it has been a big learning curve on the stylistic nature of those. I'm adapting pretty quickly as hopefully I try and do as best I can. And so I've been playing around with a lot of stuff. But you've sort of covered and sort of been at the forefront of a lot of, I would say, trends that have stuck around. Like sometimes there's trends that come and go and you'll never see them again. I recently had a conversation with a friend about barrel aging and how barrel aging has been sort of demonized now, and I'm like, I don't think anyone ever really like dug into it and really got into it. At Clive's we've got a 4.5-year-old Solera aged Boulevardier right now, like, and I don't think anyone's been doing in 3 different flavored barrels, so no one's ever done like a really crazy 5-year experiment with these sort of things. But
Mhm.
you've sort of championed like carbonation. You've talked about how dilution, and as you were saying about batching was a good one, because I think a lot of people when they go into batching, they're not thinking about how the batch changes when you put it together. As you said, sharp edges. You know, when you
Yeah.
make a margarita, you've got a sharp edge of tequila and maybe a sharp edge of lime, but you put that into a batch and let it sit for 2 or 3 days, it softens up really quick. What's your and you said you go deep down the rabbit hole. Is there something you usually see at a bar or at a show and you go, okay, well, I'm going to go into deep into that a little bit more?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have lists of stuff to get nerdier about, but I've got to balance that with paying the rent. This has become increasingly an issue
Yeah.
because the state of journalism is not great, even in drinks, which is lifestyle journalism.
Hmm.
But a lot of the old familiar sites that we've been reading for years have been decimated with buyouts and ownership
Hmm.
changes and um, things like that. So there are less and less places to write about them and to get paid for them, and they're not increasing their rates to
Mm.
writers on the other side. So that's a thing that restrains me quite a bit. Because I'm like, I just know no one's gonna be interested in a lot of the nerd stuff that I am. I do love the state of writing about whiskey science. Like that's something where people did a really good job. Like
Hmm.
we know so much more about wood and aging than um, was written about a few years ago, and there are a lot of places to read it, which is not the case for Baijiu, for example. There's one book,
Yeah.
and you go there, but so much more has to come from experience and tasting and things like that. I forget what the question was.
When it comes to like when you come and see, so you were saying like obviously yes, the state of journalism is really rough. When you see something you want to sort of dig deep into it, then you're balancing out like, is someone going to read a 1,500 word article on Baijiu? It's a super interesting. Like I don't think 1,500 words would even scratch the surface of like, let's use Baijiu as an example.
No,
Like it
actually,
really isn't insane.
I have a really good series on Baijiu on academics,
Okay.
because I went on a press trip with Ming River a ways back, and I went real deep, and there's a lot deeper to go. You can only learn so much, but just understanding the basics of how it's made in the different categories and how they're all made and why they taste the way they do is it's kind of a lot to get to like a real minimum level
Hmm.
that we would have with other spirits in the world to understand the point of it all, I guess, is part of the issue there. But yeah, and lately I've been getting into niche history topics again, which can be interesting, and sometimes you get to write about them, and they're more something that you would write about in a book, I guess, than in articles. But for example, I've been getting more into San Francisco history via
Mm.
cocktails because I traditionally was not really all of that, not much of a history geek, and everything I know comes directly from David Wondrich, directly into my brain. I read every word that he writes, and everywhere. I mean, I basically follow him around the internet and read it all. I read all of the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails last year, and that was a big project, and I
Wow.
forgotten 90% of it already, I think, but I have lots of highlights in my Kindle copy so I can find them again. But yeah, so I've been getting into different parts of history and following threads. There's a new book out coming out by, speaking of Instagram influencers, it's How to Be a Better Drinker, and it just got me thinking about the concept of cocktail books with etiquette lessons, and
Hmm.
this is one that has them. And so then I went back and I got the old Esquire Handbook for Hosts from 1949, and
Nice.
this book Shake 'em Up from really the end of Prohibition, and how there are different etiquette drinking books for men and for women, and it's basically like how to throw this guy out of your party at the end, like so overstayed his welcome and things like that. So and previously I went down a rabbit hole into early distillation in the era of alchemy before it was even about producing
Mm.
distilled spirits, and who was distilling and what they were distilling and all of that, and a lot of that went into my book Doctors and Distillers. But then I realized there were a lot of women distilling in the era of alchemy before it was commercialized
Mm.
spirits production, and that's like super interesting. So I got into that and I gave a talk on that few years ago, I guess. It tails.
Nice. I'm gonna link up all your books onto my link tree so that everybody can get it once the episode drops down. What are you excited for 2025? Like, what's the plan for 2025? And are you seeing trends and things in the industry that you're like, I'm down for this?
That is a good question. I haven't thought much about it. I'm seeing a lot of structural like design in bars that's getting kind of exciting for me. Like thankfully we're moving a bit away from the speakeasy thing that everything
Mm,
is dark with lots of planks and wood and stuff. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go to San Diego, but like the most spectacular bars anywhere on planet Earth are all in San
oh
Diego.
wow.
Yeah, there's mostly one company that builds a lot of bars, and they spend a lot of time and money and on the design of them. Just absolutely spectacular venues to be inside, and they're not all trying to be, authentically old timey looking, but a lot of different interpretations of bars, and then they really build around them. And we're getting, for the first time, some in San Francisco. Kind
Mm,
of rooftop fancy bars are coming back in San Francisco, and we just expect that every place is going to have a minimum good quality of cocktails
mm,
here. That's kind of a given, but we're getting more elaborate venues in which to have those cocktails again.
mm.
And so that's something that I have nothing to do with. I'm just like a spectator getting to check out these new spots. But I've been into seeing these new interpretations of cocktail bars that are elevated in the design way.
Yeah, I visited a couple. The one that really stuck out for me that was a rooftop is it's an old school place that's been around for a really long time, but it's upstairs in like a hotel commercial building. And I think Tony Aberganon was there like 2 weeks after I was there guest bartending. But it was a beautiful, like, o- overlooking the city, gorgeous bar space, and I was blown away with it when I was in San Francisco.
Nice. Sounds like the Starlight Room.
It was the Starlight Room. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I should start writing a list because I never remember the bars I've gone to, and people always ask recommendations, and I got to go Google them and tell them where to go. Um, but Camber, thank you so much for your time. I've got one thing we do at the end of every episode is we ask deep podcast questions. So they're deep questions that I never let on to what it is, so that we can get sort of a feel for what you are about. What is one lesson or experience that you've shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
Well, gosh. I, for better or worse, I do what I want, and this alludes to the first question that you asked about, or one of the early questions about like deep research and going deep
Hmm.
in things. Like I have no money in the bank. Basically, I just have an interesting inner life, and I really like studying things, and it's makes me satisfied on a day-to-day level. Hopefully I'll just get hit by a truck before retirement because that's not in the cards for me. But the chances are likely anyway. I'm sloppy. So I think that what keeps me satisfied is keep learning. Like a day without learning something new is not all that satisfying for me.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Uh,
Told you though, deep podcast questions.
yeah, yeah. Peace and wisdom, huh? Um, I don't know. Talk to people.
Mm,
People are interesting. Like the more people you meet and talk to, the more you understand the world and the people in it. And it's hard to have hate in your heart when you meet real people. More people should live in cities and engage with all sorts of different people, because it really, that's what makes the world a better place, is understanding that people are the same and different and interesting, and we all gotta get along.
awesome. Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
Hmm. Well, I wish I could have foreseen the death knell of journalism, because I definitely would have taken different approaches to this whole career. So that's one.
How do you define success, and how's your definition of it changed over years?
Hmm. I do. I gotta admit, like, not really on purpose, but when my ideas are spread, I consider that's so satisfying. The directional freezing stuff with ice, even like the helpful cocktail safe for providing that reference. Like when I help create something that gets used, that's successful. Like I've kind of pushed the conversation forward in some ways. Like that's an impact. I like it.
Hmm. What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
Mm. Well, I think the legacy is kind of solidified already at this point. So I could get hit by that truck anytime. It would be fine. It would definitely be the clear ice thing with directional freezing. And what was the second part of that question?
What? Wait, I think you've already done it. You've already written the book.
Uh,
You've written the book about ice. Have you got
yeah,
any other books planned for this next little bit?
I have nothing. I don't have a contract for anything. I have
Hmm.
three that I'm like going back and forth between figuring out. We're in the age of AI, and it's real threatening, like what you can have something and then a computer can write a version that looks
Hmm.
the same, and no one will
Yep.
know the difference unless they know you already. So yeah, I have like kind of a goofy one, a science and nature one, and then a San Francisco
Mm.
history kind of one. And so I haven't put any of those in a package for my agent to try to sell yet, but that's what I need to do very soon.
Well, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. And I've seen you as a leader in the industry for 15 years, well, almost 20 years since I've been in Canada. So I still remember, like, I randomly messaged you. I think we were going through San Francisco airport on the way to Tails. And I was like, I'm laying, I think I put up on Facebook. I was like, literally, like, I'm laying in San Francisco. I have a 3 hour layover. What we're going to do? And you're like, come to Buena Vista. There's going to be a bunch of us. And you just invited me down to the Buena Vista in the airport. And we had Irish coffees, as you do. And then we separated to our flights. And I still have that memory because I think it's my second or third trip to Tails. And I was like 29, 30, 31 years old. And I was still that geeky kid from Australia living in Canada. And then also being able to have a conversation with people like yourself was just it's always been a treat. It's something that sticks in my head as a Tails memory, even though it wasn't at Tails. So I
Right.
really appreciate you, and all the stuff that you do. I hope that you get more DMs and everything from young bartenders going, thank you for all the work you do, because you do amazing work, and I've always looked up to you for that.
Well, thank you very much.
So I'll drop you a message when this episode drops. But thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to talk to you, as
Cheers,
always.
Camper. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.